Namaskar and good evening. So today we have a special surprise for the gospel class today. It will be taken by Swami Vidyanathananda ji, Mahan Maharaj. So we are lucky to have him because he is here in New York just for a couple of days. He came here to give a talk in mathematics at CUNY. And I took this opportunity to grab him for this class, the Tuesday class. He's generally averse to giving talks in spiritual topics. And when I wrote to him about this, he said, I was afraid of this. But we are lucky and grateful that he agreed to give this class. Just a couple of sentences about him. I mean, I could go on and on. He's a very interesting and unique personality, but I also know that he is averse to any kind of, praise, personal details, anecdotes, of which I have many. Our monks of our order have many anecdotes about him, both edifying and amusing, which maybe I'll share some other time when he's not here, because he'll be embarrassed and annoyed if I go on about him personally. But just the bare facts. You can always Google him. There is, if you Google Mahan Maharaj, he is familiarly known as Mahan Maharaj. He joined the order in 1998 and got his sannyasa, formal monastic vows, in 2008. And he is, of course, an eminent mathematician. He works in hyperbolic geometry and topology. He's got two of India's highest science awards, the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award and the Infosys Award. He's an internationally known topologist. But besides that, he is a very serious spiritual seeker, an austere, dedicated monk. We all know him in order to be very meditative, a very deep thinker, and very interesting. You have to pay close attention to what he is saying. At present, he is on loan from our order. He's unique in that also. He's on, as it were, in loan from our order to the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, which is a premier fundamental science research institute of India in Mumbai. He stays in our Mumbai ashram, but does research and teaching at TIFR. Okay, I think that's it. Mahan Maharaj.
Om Stapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmasvarupine avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. Thank you very much, Sarvapriyananda, for this very kind introduction. The trouble with introductions that are too kind is that they raise expectations. And I'm pretty sure I won't be able to fulfill them. Anyway, whatever it is. So here's the thing. We will have Sarvapriyananda asked me, I did say that I was afraid. And the reason I'm afraid is, as he said, because my background is being a mathematician. And whenever I'm talking about such spiritual matters, particularly deep spiritual matters, I keep asking myself whether what I'm saying is really true, or is it just that I'm speculating. And mathematical standards of rigor are things I try to satisfy when I talk about this and inevitably fail. So that's the reason for the fear. It's not anything else. It's basically because of that. So essentially, I think, and over the years, one has probably learned that there is something in this trepidation. In the sense that if we try to put forward these matters as something that is logically consistent or complete, there is something or the other that will inevitably be missed. And so I think the best way to talk about these matters, and I know that in Sarvapriyananda's center, because non-duality has a place of eminence and prominence, it would be appropriate to talk about something, and it's very close to my heart, which means basically here, you see, I'm not talking about logical things, but non-duality as something that rings true. Truth is something that is felt. It's not just something that you logically arrive at. So we picked a passage from the Gospel of Ramakrishna. It's referred to, the chapter in Nikhilanji's book is referred to as the Master and the Buddha. It's from 1886. Sri Ramakrishna had already been diagnosed with his cancer. This is somewhere in April 1886. So we'll read out the passage and then we'll do some discussion. Just one thing. If there is anything that is unclear, again, coming from giving mathematical talks, it's a little boring to give one-way discourses. So if there is interruption, I'd be very happy. Just raise your hand and we'll try to address things. Okay. All right. So let's start. Master, smiling to M. He went there, referring to Bodh Gaya. Here he refers to Swami Vivekananda, then Narendra. M to Narendra. What are the doctrines of Buddha? Narendra. He could not express in words what he had realized by his tapasya, so people say he was an atheist. Master by science. Why atheist? He was not an atheist. He simply could not express his inner experiences in words. Do you know what Buddha means? It is to become one with Bodha, pure intelligence, by meditating on that which is of the nature of pure intelligence. It is to become pure intelligence itself. Narendra. Yes, sir. There are 3 classes of Buddhas: Buddha, Arhat, and Bodhisattva. Master. This too is a sport of God himself, a new Leela of God. Why should Buddha be called an atheist? When one realizes Svarupa, the true nature of one's self, one attains a state that is something between asti, is, and nasti, is not. Let me repeat this sentence because in some sense I think this is crucial. This and one more sentence we'll pick up later on are crucial to this passage, well, at least in the way I read it. When one realizes Svarupa, the true nature of one's self, one attains a state that is something between asti, is, and nasti, is not. Narendra to M. It is a state in which contradictions meet. A combination of hydrogen and oxygen produce cool water, and the same hydrogen and oxygen are used in the oxyhydrogen blowpipe. In that state, both activity and non-activity are possible. That is to say, one then performs unselfish action. Worldly people who are engrossed in sense objects say that everything exists, asti. But the Mayavadis, the illusionists, say that nothing exists, nasti. The experience of a Buddha is beyond both existence and non-existence. Master, this existence and non-existence are attributes of Prakriti. The reality, capital R, is beyond both. So this last sentence is what I had referred to earlier. This existence and non-existence are attributes of Prakriti. The reality is beyond both. So let me repeat again these two sentences which sort of stare out from this page. When one realizes, I'm repeating this earlier sentence, when one realizes Swarupa, the true nature of oneself, one attains a state that is something between Asti is and Nasti is not. Sentence 1. And last sentence, this existence and non-existence are attributes of Prakriti. The reality is beyond both. There is a slight difference between the way these two sentences are phrased. The first says one attains a state between is and is not. The last sentence says reality is beyond both existence and non-existence. This subtle difference, it could have been referred to as a casual use of words, but I think there is something there. So the first sentence, and I'll put forward some way one can try to understand these two sentences, and then, each of us is, that's the good thing about reading the Gospel. Each of us is free to make of it as we please. The first one, here is a broad way of saying it. The first one is a kind of a psychological statement, and the second is more of a logical statement. Yeah? So the first one is one attains a state. So the mind itself attains a state where it is between the mind is and the mind is not. We'll expand on that in a little moment. It sounds all kind of cryptical and very esoteric for the moment, but let's bear with me for a moment. The other is essentially saying that something, reality per se, is something that is transcendental. It does not, it is not amenable to this fundamental dualistic categorization of Asti versus Nasti. Yeah. So if you look at all possible dualities, good versus bad, beautiful versus ugly, etc., and try to resolve it back to its, where does this fundamental duality come from? Ontologically, it's between is something exists versus something does not exist, is and is not. But then what transcends? Which means you cannot put reality per se, even in terms of what we experience subjectively, into either of these categories. I think this is what really transcendent means. Essentially, not amenable to being caught within mental frameworks, mental logical frameworks. Is in some sense the broadest possible logical framework, and is not is the negation of that, also a very broad possible logical framework. And for those of you who are familiar with this, there's something that we in mathematics call the principle of the excluded third, which basically says a proposition P is the negation of itself. So you put two knots, you get back to. So it is not raining. It is not raining means it is raining. That's what it means. Okay. Whereas here, the logical or ontological statement that is being made in this last statement is that if we are trying to understand something as fundamental as reality itself, then at some stage, penultimate stage, we should be able to forego this fundamental duality between saying something is and saying something is not. This has echoes in, when one talks about Vedanta, we talk about the definition of Brahman in terms of Sat Chitananda. Well, what exactly is Sat? And it is explained as not a Sat. It's not something that is not. Yeah? That is not existent. Yeah? That's the only. You don't say that it is existent in the way that this chair is existent, this laptop is existent, etc. So that is the logical part of it. What about the first one, Osti Nastir Maje? Between is and is not. Here what we are really being asked to do is introspect into our psychological state, which says that something is versus something is not. Do we experience it? And I think particularly here, it's relatively easy for me to say because Sarvapriyananda has been talking about it for so long. I think this is something that we do experience. We do experience presence of something. We do experience the absence of something. And when we look at the Mandukya Upanishad, this deep sleep, and actually I had asked him last time he visited Bombay, he has this, it sounded very pithy, very catchy, and very apposite, where he described deep sleep not as the absence of experience, but as the experience of absence. I'm sure many of you would recognize that phrase. And he admitted that it was something original that he had come up with, and it was very, very, very appropriate. The point is that in deep sleep, we experience nothing. We experience absence. Yeah? Just as in our waking and dream state, we experience something, similarly in deep sleep, we experience nothing. So psychologically, if we have to catch the experiencer, then in the field of vision of the experiencer, so to speak, yeah, athava nava, as the Upanishads keep on saying. So when they try to probe into these fundamental things, they put one logical possibility and then immediately counter it with the opposite. So we have to say that this whole of experience, which includes the experience of something and the experience of nothing, both need to be embraced. If we have to have a totality of, a complete idea, a holistic idea of what the experiencer is, then we have to grasp it in the experience of something and in the experience of nothing. Which means, this is, I think, in some sense, psychologically, the mind spontaneously comes forth and catches hold of the world and says something is. That same mind becomes quiescent, and in deep sleep, we come back and say we experienced nothing. Now, can we say that the experiencer is in deep sleep? We can say that the experiencer is in waking state, but only when we are conflating it with a specific experience. If we try to unify these, this is, in some sense, the yoga schools, they try to explain this in a slightly different way. they try to say basically that you'll try to look at your mind, try to understand your mind, and then the mind comes forth in what they call vrittis, which means that the mind spontaneously comes forth and reflects various things. So it sees a light, and then we divert our mind, we see a fan moving, etc., etc. Try to catch hold of that little pause between these two vrittis. This is what they say. And in some sense, that betweenness, if we are to try to identify it, because see, the thing is, somehow or the other, we cannot really bring up deep sleep as an object of experience. Almost tautologically not possible. But practically, if we are to try to understand that, this is something that we could be doing. I mean, this is in one of the Yoga Sutras basically says, if one really needs to develop this capacity to discriminate, analyze, it's this differentiation at that fundamental level. What one is doing is really one is looking at one of these forms of the mind versus, in some sense, the next. So in this sense, it is psychological. This betweenness is psychological. And the other one, ontologically, is transcendent. Okay. So as far as these this particular passage is, yes, please.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So when you say that it's the mind that is, so in the statement that was made that if Buddha knows himself, Swarupa,
Yes.
that it's a state between is and is not.
Yes.
But you're saying it's a state of the mind.
Ah, wonderful. See, this is the problem with words. Wonderful. That's very good. Actually, you have led me to exactly what I was about to say. That's very good. Thank you very much. So, I was going to say, there is again a Vedantic statement on one of the Upanishads. Manaso amani bhave param tattva nigadhyate. So, in Sanskrit, I'll translate that. When the mind becomes non-mind, then the reality is revealed. That contradiction is summarized here. But somehow or the other, it conveys to us some content. Where the first mind basically is talking about the mind's usual attributes, usual capacities, usual functionalities. But when the mind negates itself, amani bhave, manasa amani bhave, when the mind becomes non-mind, which means it does not spontaneously go forth and catch hold of something. So this is, yes, we can grasp it logically, but in some sense, it's something about this mind itself that needs to be analyzed further. And perhaps instead of this something versus nothing or is versus is not dichotomy, what would be very helpful is if we took this contradiction to the extreme and pitched not something versus nothing, but everything versus nothing, all versus nothing. And what really is going on here is that if we say that the reality is the all in some deep sense, or whether we say that the reality is nothing, again in a deep sense, then these two fundamental contradictions are supposed to merge, but merge in our subjective perception. Again, we are using words, but we are trying to indicate that these two non-dual philosophies, particularly Madhyamaka Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta, they take roots to catching hold of this reality in a fundamental sense, but logically the language is different. One is saying, no, nothing. Finally, if you look at reality, and you start off from your common sense perception, then it all gets sublated. Nothing persists. There is no substance in any of these things, in any of the some things that we see. And therefore, nothing is the reality. Give it a name, Shunya. But the fundamental point there is that there has to be a deep inquiry. It is not nihilism in that sense. Similarly, Advaita Vedanta, when it says all, it does not mean this fan, this light, all these things. Yeah? It is when these some things have become all. Yeah? And so the subjective state which is really trying to express itself and inevitably failing, is really talking about this fundamental duality between is and is not, and trying to reconcile them. And logically, it's not possible. In a certain sense, if we try to express it in words, not possible. And therefore, what it is really doing is it's pointing a finger. It's pointing to a certain subjective inquiry that we are supposed to go through. Yeah? In order to, so unless that inquiry, all that this can practically, pragmatically, what it can really instill in us is the spirit of inquiry to get at the basis of things. Yeah? So, not taking these as fundamental logical doctrines, that would defeat the purpose. But really, when one is saying that none of this is, or this is all, what does that sentence really mean to me? This is the question that it's supposed to be instilling in us. So yes, so thank you very much for this question. And the next thing that one would like to do is I'll take a few passages from the Upanishads and then from the Buddhist literature where this fundamental apparent contradiction comes through. And the first couple of passages from, my favorite Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka, Mandukya and Brihadaranyaka, which is, I don't know. So Brihadaranyaka, so in the Brihadaranyaka, there are these two statements. First it says, this is from chapter 2, Yatra hi dvaitam iva bhavati tat itaram itaram pashyati. So when there is duality, then one sees another, and so on. Yeah? Concludes with, Yatra tu asya sarvam atma eva abhut. This was, I think, referred to in English in Greg's talk on Sunday. Yatra tu asya sarvam atma eva abhut. Tatra kenakam pashyet, tatra kenakam jigret, tatra kenakam manvita, tatra kenakam vijaniyat. And then this finally concluding with this brilliant rhetorical question, Vignata aramare kena vijaniyat. What's basically saying that when all has become absorbed in the essence of oneself, sarvam means all these things, all these perceptions, emotions, cognitions, have become absorbed. Here, this word Atma literally means the essence. Yeah? It does not mean something mystical. Yeah? Essentially, what one is asking is, what is the essence of oneself? Yeah? So, if one takes this empirical I as something that is existent and starts asking what is really essential about this, then where it culminates is called the Atman. That's all. And when all the objective universe, so-called objective universe, has become the other, oneself versus the other, has all become absorbed in that which we thought was the essence of oneself, yatra tu asya sarvam atma eva abhut, when all has become identified with one's self, tatra kenakam pashyet, then by what should one see another? By what should one think of another? By what which will one know another? These are rhetorical questions. Finally, vignata aramare kena vijanyat. How indeed can one know the knower? Which means that you cannot know the knower as an object. This much only can be said. Yeah? So the knower, the subject cannot be known, tautologically, the subject cannot be known as an object. That's all it means, really. In some sense, what this passage is emphasizing is the all, yeah? The identity of the essence of one's being with all. Yatra tu asya sarvam atma eva abhut. That means the essence of oneself being identified with essence of what we call, what this word all represents. Everything represents. Yeah? On the other hand, in the same Upanishad, there is this another brilliant passage where one is actually giving a hint as to how this inquiry is to proceed. And it says, Sa esha neti neti atma. This Atman, the only way to know it is not this, not this. Often, this is a very unfortunate translation. Yeah? Not this Atma. What is it? What's it about? It's a bizarre way of translating. But the thing is, usually, when one tries probing language, there are connotations. Yeah? The thing is, these things are supposed to connote something, not the symbols themselves. And maybe, this is something I just suggest to you, maybe a happier translation, not just this, which means it captures this psychological discomfort with catching hold of a doctrine or a dogma as something final, which means it is inducing us to probe deeper. Yeah? We identify ourselves with such and such and such. It's basically saying, not just this, something more, something deeper, something more fundamental. In a passage of Shankaracharya's, one of Shankara's beautiful hymns, talks about this word, this phrase, atakim. One of our former presidents of the Ramakrishna Order, Swami Vidyanathananda, he used to keep talking about this, and in this particular connotation. See, atakim means what next? This is the process of inquiry which is expressing a lack of satisfaction with something that is already is given to you as something there out there on the table. Because finally, a doctrine is something that is other. It is an object. Yeah, as soon as you encapsulate it in words, in some concept, it's a convenient logical framework. And it somehow pretends to be an answer when it is not. And maybe the correct thing to do is to essentially think of the answer not as an answer, but really a further question. That's the point of it. So as far as we as aspirants are concerned, as we as human beings are concerned, what this basically tells us to do is probe deeper. Yeah? Psychologically, I think that's something that can be of assistance to us, rather than a conclusive statement saying that this is what it is, which it cannot be. And then this whole passage is Sa esha neti neti atma agrihyo nahi grihyate ashiryo nahi shiryate asango nahi sajyate asito na vyatate na rishyati. It's basically saying that it cannot be grasped. It does not become lesser. It does not get stuck to various other things. Asango nahi sajyate. Which means all these conceptual frameworks, it's essentially asking us, cut through this, because these frameworks are what define our mind. Yeah? And essentially, if we are asking something as fundamental as what is really essential about my being, then we need to inquire into the foundations of what we regard as oneself. Yeah? And so this surfaces in any non-dual path. But what happens psychologically is really given in the very next sentence in the Brihadaranyaka, where he says, this is Yagnavalkya talking to Janaka. And he says, Abhayam vai Janaka praptosi. Why? So basically, you have reached fearlessness. At the end of this enquiry, one reaches fearlessness. He's picking up the one psychological factor that indicates duality, which is fear. And they basically say, when there is a second, yatra dvaitam iva bhavati. So that means when there is a fear of the second, but when one has recognized that all of this is really oneself, then there is nothing to be afraid of. So it's basically the fear that one is limited, yeah? And therefore one is susceptible to destruction. This is or losing something. Yeah? The second can impinge on me, reduce what I have thought of myself as, and limit it. That principle of limitation fundamentally is what fear is about. Yeah? And when that principle, when one has seen that there is nothing whatsoever that can possibly limit the essence of one's being, then that which is the psychological opposite, namely fear, is gone. Yeah? In particular, that finally, at the end of the day, at death, one does not lose what is essential to oneself. Yeah? This does not mean any doctrine about various after-death experiences, nothing mystical. Yeah? But in the here and now, catching hold of the here and now. Yeah? It's not about metempsychosis, it's not about some theories of something of after-death experience, some judgment day or reincarnation, nothing about it. But it is a statement about reality itself. It's essentially asking, what is it that dies? And to answer that question, one has to address the question, what is it that I thought was born? Yeah. Actually, in a very devotional hymn, this is sung in the Arati here every day, Martya Amritam Tava Padam. That state is the source of literally immortality in that which is mortal. Yeah? So basically it's asking, this question has to be asked in ourselves. That which is caught within the framework of time, something comes forth is going to go. But something that does not come forth, not caught within this framework of causality, not caught within the framework of space-time causation, yeah, cannot be born, hence cannot die. And not just as something that is logical, not something that is just as a doctrine, but to be investigated and answered for oneself. Yeah? This process of inquiry is what this is probing towards. It's pushing us towards. Okay, so this is from the Upanishads, and I promised that I'd say something from the Buddhist literature, because finally that's where we started, right? We started about the doctrine of the Buddha. And this is actually from one of these very lyrical and beautiful Buddhist sutras. It's what's called the Pragya Paramita Sutra. Yeah. So this is Buddha himself. talking about it. Iha Sariputra is one of his prominent disciples, Sariputra. Iha Sariputra Sarva Dharma. All dharma. Here, by dharma means all that we call things. By things, he does not mean objects in the sense of physical objects only, but objects of perception, which means physical things, perceptions, emotions, sensations, all these are called dharma in that sense. Iha Sariputra Sarva Dharma Shunyata Lakshanaha. Yeah. There is no essence in any of these cognized objects. And then Anutpanna has not arisen. Aniruddha does not die. Amala does not have mala, means impurities. Avimala does not have absence of that. See the contradictory, the logical opposites are being put one next to the other. Anuna aparipurnaha. That is, it's not less, it is not full. Tasmat Sariputra, therefore Sariputra, Shunyatayam, in Shunyata, na Rupam, there is no form, na Vedana, it's conditions, na Sangya, na Samskaraha, na Vijnanam. Here, Sariputra, all things have characteristic of emptiness, no arising, no ceasing, no purity, no impurity, no deficiency, no completeness. Tasmat Sariputra, therefore Sariputra, Shunyatayam, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no perception, no volitional processes, no individual consciousness, no individuated consciousness of a thing. So, what it's being put forward here, I mean, essentially, since the Buddhist way of thinking does not refer back to some scriptural authority, therefore they are trying to probe it empirically, which means this empirical perception of an individual's psyche. Yeah? That's treated as the starting point. And you start investigating into it, and it basically says that which you thought as substantial, that means one's mind, one's feelings, one's emotions, one's cognitions, is bereft of substance. So that which we thought was something very substantial, and finally, this empirical eye with which we are obsessed, we think of as very substantial, is finally undermined. Yeah? Essentially said that, look, there is no essential substance in all of this. That seems to be a very violent negation. And it could lead us to nihilism, provided it was not countered by its opposite. And there is, in the same kind of Buddhist literatures, I mean, somehow or the other, it's amazing that here is somebody who is supposed to negate everything and at the same time talks of compassion as the greatest virtue. And here, just as we saw in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, there is this all versus nothing, Saesha neti neti atma versus sarvam atma eva abhut. Yeah? So these two things, the logical opposites occurring almost simultaneously. In the Buddhist literature, we have the same thing. It's called basically, in some form or the other, it's called the doctrine of pratitya samutpada. Which means, I'll have to quote somebody who was called the second Buddha, Nagarjuna, who has been talked about here again. The first passage of Mula Madhyamika Karika says, neither from itself, nor from another, nor from both, nor without a cause, does anything ever, anywhere arise. Yeah? This is J. Garfield's translation, first stanza. I'll come back to that. But What is it that the Buddhist teachings talk about when it talks about these arising? Finally, in spite of all these logical niceties, we look around, we see a world. Yeah. How do we relate to it? Yeah, if we do it wrongly, it's catching hold of a snake by the wrong end. Yeah, that was this Nagarjuna's expansion. So there they talk about this pratitya samutpada, this arising, that which arises, which is what our common sense cognition tells us, is essentially the idea of dependent origination. Yeah? What does it mean? It means essentially that trying to see the all. Yeah? On the one hand, this shunyata lakshana, this passage was basically talking about nothing. Yeah? But when they talk about pratitya samutpada, they are really talking about the everything, and they are essentially talking about trying to take the some things, the individual things, into a perspective where it's seen as the all, and the all arises simultaneously with the something. What does it mean? Pragmatically, what does it mean? So, for instance, one is wearing some cloth, yeah? And it's actually the idea about behind this is it's not something that's esoteric, yeah? It's not something that we have to strain our mind to catch hold of in some sense. It starts with something very commonsensical. Let's say we are wearing this cloth. When we try to look at the cloth, what's it made of? It's made of these strands of, say, cotton. Yeah? Pretty sure this is a cotton shirt, so it's definitely made of cotton. So it means it's made of cotton threads. Okay, fine. That's something that we can logically infer very easily. Where have those cotton threads come from? Well, they've come from the field, right? So from cotton wool, this has been made in. Where has that cotton that has grown in the field come from? Well, it has absorbed, in order to provide that cotton for the thread which I am wearing now, it needed to have absorbed the sunlight, the rain, the soil. All of that has gotten involved. The labor of the person who has tilled the soil, the person who has converted that cotton wool into the thread, and the person who has stitched it all together, all of this is involved in my wearing this shirt right here, right now. Which means that we who are accustomed to thinking of this shirt in isolation from the all have only our myopia to blame for that. Which means basically that we are thinking of this in isolation essentially because our brain shuts off these extra inputs. I'm not exaggerating. That's how the human brain functions. Otherwise, we would be hearing noise. Yeah? But when we hear things, there is this something called the party effect. If somebody is in a party and there's some group of people at a distance talking, and one wants to eavesdrop on that conversation, then people try to strain, and then somehow or the other the human mind shuts out the noise, and one hears something which one would otherwise not hear. So which means basically we can focus not just through our eyes, focus our attention not just through our eyes, we can focus our attention through our ears. But that's what the brain does. It essentially shuts out signals which it regards as noise so that we can have this fragmented view of reality so that we can proceed. The brain was designed as a hot, wet thing. It's just a bunch of things thrown together. Some experiments of genetics tried, and some things functioned. Yeah, it's not was not aiming at logical consistency. It was just aiming at survival from an evolutionary point of view. But if today we try to understand the structure that is there behind it, then we need to delve into this all which is somehow involved in the way our minds function. And then, in and through every little something that we perceive, these meditations, this Pratitya Samutpada meditations, these are actually supposed to be practices in the Buddhist literature. They essentially make us see the all. Yeah? And the culmination then is, because then what one is doing is, in both these traditions, in both the Buddhist tradition and in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, what one is doing is one is picking up these logical extremes, which is where all duality somehow coalesces. The all versus the nothing. Is versus is not. And what they're asking us to do, reconcile them. Yeah? Reconcile them in terms of it cannot be logically reconciled. Yeah? Therefore, for instance, in one particular Buddhist tradition, the Zens, yeah, they tell you, for instance, these Zen koans. Yeah? One such koan, it sounds funny. Actually, one of former presidents just passed away, Swami Vidyanathananda. So he told this, and says, okay, let me suggest a Zen koan to you. Take everything seriously, take nothing seriously. Yeah? It sounds like, well, nonsense, right? Yeah, of course, logically it is nonsense. But on the other hand, this little phrase, take everything seriously, take nothing seriously, one tries probing it. That means basically it's the same human mind which is capable of taking everything seriously, and the same mind which is capable of taking nothing seriously. The freedom of the mind lies in deciding when it takes everything seriously and when it takes nothing seriously. It has this freedom to focus fully on something, and basically when that thing is decided, can give it up completely. Yeah. In one place, and finally I'll end with this and open up for further questions. Vivekananda, there are these three practices which are basically, from different traditions, which are really talking about the same thing. The Christian or the more devotional practitioners basically talk about practice of the presence of God. The Buddhists, who do not have a theistic bent, they are talking about the practice of mindfulness, which means being aware. Yeah? Essentially, using this particular function of awareness to be aware of the all. Yeah? Aware of sensations, aware of things, aware that one is sitting, etc., etc. And finally, in Vivekananda's Karma Yoga, he just simply says that what is the practice? It's essentially saying taking anything that one is doing and applying one's full mind to it. What one is doing is essentially taking the faculty of attention. Yeah? So there's two things, either awareness or attention. These are the two primary psychological factors that go on when the mind functions. What each of these parts is doing is picking up one of these and essentially saying, cultivate it. So when working, which is what we do most of the time, just applying our full mind to the matter at hand. That's all that is there. Yeah? Nothing mystical, nothing esoteric. But practicing that is the practice of essentially seeing the all in the moment. Yeah? So catching hold of the here and now. Yeah? That's all this is about. The presence of God means this emphasis is on presence. In this moment, in the here and now. Yeah? This is all that we have available to us. So there's a passage in this, something called the Rubaiyat, Omar Khayyam, who happens to be an astronomer of repute, but also a great poet, philosopher. fill the cup that today of past regrets and future fears. Tomorrow, why tomorrow I may be myself with yesterday's 7,000 years. Past regrets and future fears. These are poets. Yeah? Poet, astronomer, mathematician. Yeah. So essentially, basically, he's saying that this moment, he's really talking about that. Past regrets and future fears. Basically, the past is gone. The future is yet to come. What do we have really, something that we can really hold on to, is the present moment. Yeah? Can we focus on that? So which means basically it does not really talk about doctrines. Yeah? It's essentially all these various religious traditions saying that the hint towards all these things, that big words in terms of realization, etc., is the practice is catching hold of something that we have freely available to us. And the one thing that we have freely available to us is the here and now. And essentially, trying to make sense of that is all that this is about. Okay, so I think I have gone 1 minute beyond the time, so thank you very much. Yeah.